This whole idea starts with stuff that you've probably heard a lot about, which is that everything in the Jewish community is changing. In fact, even the language, the Jewish community, I think is increasingly dangerous and inaccurate language to describe the networks of Jews that live in a given area or that make up a network of Jewish organizations serving a geographic area as opposed to the community, even in Atlanta. And I think one of the things that we're seeing is that it's not just, everyone likes to make fun of millennials. Right before the book came out, I heard a quote on NPR and I found the research article. 42% of millennials don't like to eat breakfast cereal because it takes too much time to set it up and clean it up, right? Most millennials have never bought music in their lives. They never had to buy music before, and they never had to listen to music in a way that either the artist or the producer had to choose, right? They got to make their own playlist. They never had to sit through a whole album as decided by the producer or the artist. So you get a sense that this is a generation, and it's not just them, it's all of us are influenced by this. I'm solidly in Generation X, and it's totally part of my makeup also, which is we want high degrees of customization. We've gone from a world of macro trends and macro community and doing things in public to a world that's much more about micro trends, micro communities, and doing things more in private, right? So instead of going to a town hall meeting, if you want to engage in kind of ranting and raving, you just go on social media. And you're still doing it in community with people you know, but you may be doing it in your house as opposed to at the town hall. All of this has like a really big impact, as you can imagine, very quickly on how Jewish organizations function. I want to just give one other example that I think drives this home. In 1952, 70% of Americans watched I Love Lucy. Same channel, same moment in time, same commercial. So you think about what that was like to go to work the next day or to talk to your friends the next day and what it meant to be an American all lined up with the same things, the same time, and the same format. There's nothing like that in American life besides the Super Bowl. Essentially what's happening is the students are all watching the same shows, but they're doing it whenever they want on their phones, on their laptops, really not on iPads for college students. And they do it when they have a break. It's like 10 o'clock, they're at the library, they want to pause, they watch, Game of Thrones. So they're all watching, but not together. And so you think about how that contrasts with the way that the Jewish institutional world is structured, which is big denominations, big federations, the Jewish community, Reform Judaism, Conservative Judaism, the State of Israel. It's all about how an individual can associate themselves into a much larger umbrella. And that doesn't really go so well with a lot of Jews. We know that from the Pew study. I think the real headline of the Pew study is not that Judaism is dying. It was the contrast between Jewish views of institutions, which was very low, and increasing rates of disaffiliation, with a new statistic, which is 94% of American Jews feel positively about Judaism, which is more than double what it was in the 80s. So it's actually, Judaism's on its way up, it's just relating to Jewish institutions seems to be on its way down. Those terms, attendance, affiliated, involved, it's all what we want those Jews to do for the sake of our institution. It has very little to do with Judaism, right? Especially in a moment of organizational shrinkage, we get so focused on our numbers and our size and the health of the institution that we forget the second half of the paragraph, which is the institution's only there to make a tangible, positive difference in people's lives, and I think they sense it also. So how do we get language that's not involved and uninvolved, affiliated and unaffiliated, all these linear spectrums that judge people on how much they do what we want them to do? And I realize, I just want to say, like, half of this is BS, right? But it works. It's not a scientific term or a sociological term, it's a consulting term, and I think it really does, it is helpful. Richard Joel in the 90s, who was president of Hill International, came up with the language empowerment Jews and engagement Jews. I think in his model, engagement Jews were the Jews who weren't involved, and empowerment Jews were the ones who were involved. And the goal was to go out there and to get the engagement Jews to come into Hillel and be empowerment Jews. And that, I think, is the same, it's the same problematic nomenclature as involved and uninvolved and affiliated and unaffiliated. But I think the pivot here was one, that Hillel left being a membership organization, and that the things that kept Hillel alive, which were the federation system and B'nai B'rith, B'nai B'rith was dying and the federation system was weakening, so that Hillel had to start fundraising. And the moment that Hillel had to start fundraising, Richard Joel realized it couldn't just be about the regulars. You couldn't just say we had 100 people at Shabbat dinner and therefore we're a successful Hillel when there are 1,500 or 2,500 Jews on campus. And so all of a sudden it became about every single Jewish person on campus and helping them grow into more serious adult Jews, whatever that means. What we've ended up doing at Penn Hillel to, I think, add nuance to this language is empowerment Jews are, it's not where you are right now, it's about your Jewish story. So if you spent a lot of time in Jewish organizations, you went to camp and youth group and you know what the JTA, and you were all up on the fight between AIPAC and J Street, and you read the articles in the JTA and the forward, and you understand that the Council of Presidents was voting on whether or not to include J Street, that means you're an empowerment Jew. And while those things sometimes become huge political fights in our communities or in our community organizations, engagement Jews don't know what any of that means. J Street, AIPAC, the forward, JTA, none of it. That whole alphabet soup of American Judaism, they don't know. Empowerment Jews seek out Jewish experiences in formal Jewish spaces because you need it. But it's like if you move to a new city, you would link in with the other Jews in that community because like that's who you are. That's like in your DNA. I sometimes say like if you were trapped in an airport overnight, would you find the other Jews and schmooze? I would, but engagement Jews would not. And they certainly wouldn't use the word schmooze, right? What's also interesting is that engagement Jews, actually when they do show up in organized Jewish life, feel really turned off. They feel, and it's not all our fault, but they project on whatever organization is there, all of this judgment, all of their own Jewish baggage gets projected and transferred to the organization. And our organizations don't always get it right in terms of knowing how to talk to and welcome people who don't speak the exact same language. And I think that a big part is they don't have a long resume of Jewish experiences. So they feel, according to all the research, they feel just as Jewish as we do. They feel like that Jewish identity is inalienable, cannot be broken. So they don't have to enact that Judaism in traditional ways to feel Jewish or to be Jewish. This is like Stephen Cohn and Ari Kelman who are talking about this. And what's really interesting is empowerment Jews are the ones who are the pains in your butts. Are there lay leaders in the room also? Oops, no. It's actually just a joke. But you know, it's like empowerment Jews know enough about what they want and need to be dissatisfied and to tell you exactly what's going on, right? The example I always give is that an empowerment Jew goes to visit a synagogue and they're like, oh, I'm looking for a traditional egalitarian minyan, and that rabbi was doing a lot of like touchy-feely stuff, but I'm interested in much more Jewish idiom and someone to speak to my head also. And you ask an engagement Jew what they thought, and they're like, the vibe was weird. And it's not because they're less intelligent, they just don't have the nomenclature to describe all of those boxes because they didn't grow up in a Jewish institution. So does that make sense about engagement and empowerment Jews? If you grew up, like if you went to yeshiva, high school, and then you like got to college and you left Orthodoxy, you're an empowerment Jew for the rest of your life. Even if you're unaffiliated, you're an empowerment Jew. And the truth is, engagement Jews tend to carry it with them their whole life. So I feel like I was an engagement Jew, and I'm both. Like I still carry that engagement mentality of seeing the establishment as like against me, even though they're not. But I think what's good about this is that both terms are positive, right? Both terms recognize that there are multiple ways to be Jewish, that one is not more Jewish than the other, and one group is not trying to fix the other group, which is we need to get them to be more like us. The truth is that empowerment Jews have, the definition defines part of how we engage them, which is they're seeking out stuff that's happening in the building. They have a Jewish vocabulary. They're looking, right, even the educational philosophy about how to engage empowerment Jews is spelled out here, right? It's about going deeper with the stuff they already know. And engagement Jews, now we know they have less Jewish friends, they live in less Jewish neighborhoods, they're less motivated to show up, so what do we have to do? We have to bring it to them. And we have to bring it to them in their social networks if they have Jews in their social networks. And if they don't, we have to use our bridging capital as organizational leaders to convene new Jewish communities, right? And what we see here also is that empowerment Jews show up in macro community, but it's not really macro community today. I don't think it ever was. But if you have 2,000 people for high holiday services, is it really one community? It's not really, right? People come in their little groups. But engagement Jews are really uninterested in macro. All of the data shows they want small, intimate, customized Jewish experiences that are content rich, which is really interesting. So in the 80s and 90s, when this language showed up, in the 90s when this language showed up, the feeling was engagement was about watering Judaism down. Let's have a Jewish bar night. Let's have a Shabbarbecue, where it's a Shabbat barbecue, right? Everything has to be a bad pun. It actually seems to be the opposite, that being with 10 or 15 people, where there's really things that challenge them, because the feeling is like if you're an engagement Jew, you don't need a barbecue to have a social life. On 4th of July weekend, all your friends are having barbecues anyway. What you need is something that's gonna help you do something deep, right? To give back, to serve, to answer like kind of the biggest questions that you're asking in your life, or because you're lonely and you need community, but you're not gonna get it by showing up at Hillel on Friday night with the 500 regulars. The community has to start like around a Shabbat meal. This is an adaptive leadership challenge for every legacy Jewish organization. And that's just the background that I wanted to give. We're not trying to get the engagement Jews to be empowerment Jews. And I think even there's a different financial model for the two sides of the category, which is empowerment Jews may still want to continue to pay dues, or may still be willing to give to a general annual campaign, but engagement Jews may never. But they may be willing to pay it forward, right? And that's what we found actually, is that when you make a big difference in people's lives, they're willing to pay it forward so that someone else can have that experience. And engagement Jews may be interested in getting involved philanthropically, but in a much more micro way, like through giving circles and doing it what they're gonna perceive to be on their own, even though it could be supported by a federation. But they're not, but the idea of to give to the umbrella is gonna be a real turnoff to them. The Jews don't need to hide in Jewish organizations anymore. Why is it that really smart companies that do everything right get surpassed by startups? And why is it so hard for legacy organizations to change? And basically what he found is that the core competencies required to run a mature, healthy legacy organization are the exact opposite of what it takes to run a startup. And so there's not very many examples of legacy organizations that could really be innovative. One of the rules of innovation is dead things can come back to life in new ways. What's really hard is living things. Kodak invents digital photography in 1975, and the core market of Kodak was all about paper and film and cameras and developing chemicals. And so they had this technology, and all along, all of the numbers of people who are doing photography keep shrinking. And corporate retreat after corporate retreat is focused on the fact that photography is dying, because all they were focused on is our annual campaign keeps shrinking. Membership is down. We don't have people after bar and bat mitzvah, they leave. There are less members of the JCC than there used to be, right? And so there are Jewish social scientists who talk about the fact that most of the demographic research we do measures the degree to which Jews today look and behave like their parents and grandparents, and misses the measurement of all of the Jewish innovations that are taking place in people's lives. So I think this is a very powerful example of how legacy companies can't change. And the reason is that they have too much invested in the status quo, right? Which is Kodak was beholden to its core market, and they couldn't we can't piss off all the people who want paper and chemicals and high quality 35 millimeter film to go experiment with this crappy new technology on the side. So they just kept hunkering down, and the innovations were things like, a new form of paper. They were playing it safe, which I guess is what they're supposed to do because they had a lot to lose by not playing it safe. But that's where we all are, right? JCCs, synagogues, federations, Jewish Family and Children's Services, we're not failing. We're doing incredibly important work, but we're also like maybe getting to the edge of print photography, right? Where like people still have CDs, but like MP3s are starting to percolate on the side. So the question is, how can we do two things at once? Because we can't get rid of print photography yet, maybe never, but we also can't just double down on print photography. Are you guys good with the analogy? The classic case study of how a company can do this is Dayton Hudson and Woolworth. 1962, Walmart was already up and running. Discount retailing was already a hot thing. Both of these companies wanted to get into the discount retail space. And what Woolworth did is they launched something called Woolco in 1962. They hired the same type of managers. They controlled everything. It was the same corporate culture, the same corporate metrics. And they basically just wanted something new and cool to get all those people over there to really become Woolworth customers over here. Does it sound familiar? And It didn't work, and they sunk a huge amount of money into it, and it ended up going down, I think, in 1982, and really dragged Woolworth down, I think, which closed in 1992. Dayton-Hudson, by contrast, they started Target, and they said, do whatever you want. You can open up across the street from us, you can hire people from a design background as opposed to a retail background. Do whatever you want, and let's run this experiment and see where it leads. And in the end, obviously Target did really well. Dayton-Hudson sold off its department store to Marshall Field's, and then eventually to Macy's. And the discount retailer was renamed, I think in 2000 or 2002, Target. So that's an example of how disruptive innovation can work within one company, but what it requires is a kind of bifurcation. And we found this actually at Penn Hill, which is the same board members. If you have board members who are empowerment Jews and professionals who are empowerment Jews, and everybody has NIFTY and USY and Ramah and Coleman campus here, right? And everyone's a member, they see each other at the JCC, and everyone's kibitzing and schmoozing, and it makes it really hard to run something that doesn't feel like, you know, your parents' Oldsmobile. And so the only way to do it is to get different people on the bus and to drive a different bus at the same time. And then find ways to take credit for it and to monetize it and to learn from it. I'm not saying like let it all go. I run an organization that has to keep the lights on, but where you have to really create some kind of bifurcation. What the real innovator's dilemma is, once you create something separate that's new and growing, if it starts to threaten the kind of traditional model, it's that moment where you decide not to slow it down or to take it over. In 2003, 73% of children of intermarried families didn't consider themselves Jewish, and 10 years later, 51% do consider themselves Jewish. I think there's actually a lot of positive signs. I just think that our organizations are shrinking. I don't think we're dead yet. We can't just focus on the health of our organizations. We have to focus on Judaism. And I don't mean religious Judaism. I mean Judaism in the largest thing, but if people aren't growing and living vibrant Jewish lives through philanthropy, through reading books, through community service, through prayer, through protest, it doesn't matter, but if they're not living vibrant, serious Jewish lives, that's how you grow the market to have a better campaign. Not by growing the campaign. You gotta grow more Jews. And given that about 85% feel disconnected but yet want it, I actually think it's a room for optimism, because I actually think like there's a market there, they're asking for it, we just have to get out of our film and paper and deliver it to them. So let me tell you what we're doing at Penn Hill right now, not because I think it's the answer, but I think it's an answer for us. So what we started about 10 years ago was, we didn't know about Clayton Christensen, but we said that the biggest problem Hillel has is Hillel. There's no way, we have 500 people who are regulars, there's 300 events a month, it's huge. But it's like, it's scary. I mean, it's like a full contact Jewish community. There's 6 minyanim on Friday night. It's crazy. And if you're either grew up in an organized Jewish community and are burned out of it, you run from Penn Hillel, or if you grew up with very little Jewish institutional experience and you're not pissed off to find more, you run away from it. And so even though we'd have 1,000 people, 1,000 different Jewish students every semester in the building, at that time there were still 2,500 Jews on campus. So where were the other 1,500? And so we launched something called the Jewish Renaissance Project in, 2007-ish. In addition to the brand issue, there was also like a human resources issue. We all worked like 65 or 70 hours a week. We could not meet more people. We were saturated with relationships. Hill had to be all things to all people all the time, and we could never be smart or intentional. We could never create curated spaces. Every time we tried to do something new, even if it was actually new and innovative, 50-60% of the people who showed up automatically were our regulars, and the minute they were there, it didn't feel like a new space. And the first timers who did show up felt like, oh, this is exactly what I expected Hill to feel like, an insider club that I'm on the outside of, right? Even if we were perfectly warm and welcoming. So we launched this thing, and what we did is we found new money from a new funder, and it grew to be 3 staff people who work out of the building. They don't have offices in the building. Originally, our offices were in the freshman quad, literally where students were living. And we said, go meet Jews who would never come to Hillel and figure out what to do. There was no playbook. And what ended up playing out was that we created all of these, we would have coffee dates, hundreds and hundreds of coffee dates with students. We would do essentially community organizing to get them to tell their Jewish stories. Out would come all of this guilt and pain and baggage, and also pride and excitement and interest. And if we offered them a chance to get involved in Hillel, they were not interested at all. But if we said to them, oh my gosh, this is incredible that we're having this conversation right now, because I've talked to like 20 other people this week who said the exact same thing. What are we going to do about this? And then all of a sudden we started forming these little groups, 15 or 20 people, freshmen who lived in the quad, sophomores who were in the fraternity and sorority system, juniors and seniors living off campus. In the end, there's now like 11 of these different groups. They meet once a week and they study together, and then we pay them to engage their friends. They go to all their friends that they play basketball with, like, you know, the fraternity guy who like parties with these guys and plays basketball with these guys. Now all of a sudden he's taking them out to coffee and asking them about Jewish stuff. And then they're starting to organize. They have Shabbat dinners, they have Hanukkah candle lightings, they have parties, they have discussions with different rabbis, but it's all happening in the fraternity, in the dorm, in the student newspaper office. And some of it's crap, I want to be honest, right? Not every intern that we hire is doing good stuff. I mean, in the olden days, it was like, she took a bunch of people out to see He's Just Not That Into You. And then they went out for dessert and talked about Jewish values around dating. I think we just bought the movie tickets, honestly. It's crap. And then there's some stuff that's really highfalutin, right? There were two guys one guy actually was from Atlanta, spending a lot of time getting high, spending a lot of time reading about Jewish mysticism, and they got a group of like 20 people to go out to this thing called the Biopond and smoke pot and read Zohar. Again, Hillel didn't buy the pot, but we photocopied the Zohar. Like, that was very serious, right? It was a very serious Jewish moment for those people. But what's interesting about it is it's a different brand, different types of staff people that we hire now with different Jewish stories, different methodology. Hillel is still a vertical methodology where there are leaders and attendees, and you can work your way up and become Hillel president. JRP is totally grassroots. You don't even know you're doing it, and there's no getting involved. It's just, I mean, you can get involved as an intern, but beyond that, none of the programs are advertised. They're not programs. They're just get-togethers. It's based on an inner city community development theory that says the way you really change community is not by serving them, but by empowering them to unlock the potential already contained in their social network. That's how we do that. And what's interesting is it's different donors. People who didn't like Hillel, who don't give to Federation, who don't belong to synagogues, who are alumni of the University of Pennsylvania, when they find out what we're doing, they give money to us. And they say, had that been there when I was at Penn, I would have had a different experience. So we've been able to be both Hillel and anti-Hillel. And we play it honestly, because as much as I love Penn Hillel, I also know all the limitations of it. And in a very honest way, I can rip on Penn Hillel, and I can also poke all the holes in this thing called JRP that we're doing. But the fact that we have a way to address it that seems thought through, and maybe even is thought through, gives outsiders, right, engagement Jews, confidence to invest in us. And also, we've reached we basically doubled the number of students that we reach in different ways. About half in the building, half out of the building. So in a normal year, we're reaching about 90% of Jewish students through a relationship or through an event. I didn't say program, which is the dirty P word, right? But through an event. It's not an email. That doesn't count as people on our email list. So the last thing I want to say is that we're also raising a huge amount. It's actually now about $600,000 for JRP, and the program costs $250,000 to run. And we're very transparent in the fundraising budget that it's funding my time and our development people's time and the building occupancy and all these things. So ironically, JRP isn't hurting Hillel. It's actually funding Hillel. It's making it easier for us to have Shabbos dinners and send people to Israel and to do APAC and J Street and to have those fights and to manage those fights so that we have a more pluralistic Jewish community. And I think that that's also why it's a pragmatic model. It can be practical, and the way that we do it is we track everything we do, and then we find ways to connect with those other Jews. So if Josh Cooper is having Shabbos dinners that engage these 15 people, so we make sure that some of our staff occasionally shows up at some of those Shabbat dinners and gets to know those 15 people and then goes out to coffee with those people. At the end of the year, we honor Josh Cooper, and we get his 15 friends to show up and be part of this larger dinner to celebrate. And we try really intentionally to network weave all those different intern groups together, so that, again, in the same way that Seder feels like you're part of something, that they know that even though it may not be Hillel, that they're part of a larger campus Jewish community. I don't think the theory of change here is sell the existing board on doing something that seems totally counter to what they've spent the last 10 or 15 years doing. I think the idea is you find new people who want this. You find new funders who are willing to fund it. And JRP happened very quietly, right? We didn't advertise for JRP internships that are paid in the building where there were 250 volunteer leaders, right? None of those programs are advertised, so they don't compete against Hillel programs, right? Hillel's having like, pajama Shabbat, and we're trying to get 500 people to come in the building for Shabbat. All the other JRP dinners, which might also be 500 people that Friday night, are happening, but it's just like saying, hey, Marcy, do you want to come over to my house? What are you doing Friday night? Come on over. It's a different model than, well, we have multiple minyanim in the building, so we're already doing that. We're not one size fits all. I think the minute it's the formal leadership running it for the community, and you're asking the community to show up, already means that there's a huge number of people that can't be included. We should do both, though. That it doesn't matter what agency you're a part of, the goal is more vibrant Jewish life. Right? It's that if we're doing our work right, we change people's DNA emotionally, spiritually, personally, communally, so that they end up being better people and living better lives. And that's why there needs to be a Jewish community, not just to keep the Jews alive. If we're just trying to keep the Jews alive, by the way, we have other problems with millennials, which is they see that as tribalistic and racist. That's propagating a white power structure of white privilege. Right? There has to be a deeper reason why Jews need to exist other than to not die or to not let Hitler win, which is what I got growing up a lot of. What we mean by relational Judaism and peer-to-peer engagement is that leadership is transformed. What is leadership today? I think it is, tell me if I'm right, writing checks and making decisions. If you want to add a peer-to-peer model to what we're doing, or a relational model, it means that leadership has to be building relationships with other Jews, and it has to mean being a creator of Jewish life for others. That's the Shabarbecue, right? It's not the first engagement. There's all of this relational stuff leading up to it. It's a coffee date and a conversation, and then it's a Shabbos dinner, and then it's an invitation to go somewhere to meet some other Jews, and then it's a conversation about what's missing in our community, and we all want to be partners in fixing this. And instead of having a committee do Shabarbecue, you've got networks of people who are all doing Shabarbecue to fix some existential need in the community, and then you have Shabarbecue. So what happens here? It's not real. You're not even done. Before Shabarbecue happens, you have a plan for how you're going to meet every single person who shows up, how you're going to collect their information, and how you're going to follow up with them, and you're going to know what happens next. After Shabarbecue, who's coffee dating whom? Who's inviting whom to what Shabbat dinner? Non-institutional stuff. So that in the end, you end up with a synagogue president and a federation board member who's making endowment gifts to the Jewish Community Foundation. It can be institutional in the end. The trick is just to ignore the institution for like 9/10 of the trip. And the truth is that about a third of our JRP interns, without ever asking them, get involved in Hillel. We don't want them to. We don't want it to feel like a bait and switch. But the truth is, when you inspire Jews to grow, it's not that complicated. Eventually, they're going to need larger, more formal Jewish experiences and larger, more formal Jewish communities. I really don't believe that we have the answers at Penn Hillel or that the answers are in the book, but I think that we are doing one thing that's really important, which is changing the conversation. There's like a whole new set of possibilities for the Jewish future. So I wish you guys a lot of luck. It's very brave what the community is doing together, and thank you for having me be part of it.